Hey guys, welcome to the Marriage Ignited podcast. I am Adrian Pina.
And I am Jennifer Pina. We are here sharing practical and spiritual tools to ignite your marriage.
Welcome to episode 2. We are so excited to be with you guys again today. We are beginning a new series on the podcast talking about barriers to intimacy. So these things are actually preventative in having intimacy grow in your relationship. And so we're going to be talking about that over the next couple episodes, kind of in a threefold way. We're going to talk about barriers first to emotional intimacy. Then we'll also talk about barriers to spiritual intimacy and barriers to physical intimacy. So we'll begin today by looking at emotional intimacy.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So we're going to take a step back for a moment because before we look at these barriers, we have to kind of define our terms.
Yeah.
What does the word intimacy actually mean? It's a word that's thrown around quite a bit, but it's a word that often we don't define. And why is it so important to a thriving marriage?
Yeah. So, intimacy, according to dictionary.com, is a close, familiar, and usually loving relationship with another person or group.
So, Focus on the Family has a great definition that we really like. And it says that being intimate involves the mixing of our lives with another's, the mingling of souls, a sharing of hearts. This is something that we all long for because it is how God made us. We were designed to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So God made us as emotional, spiritual, and physical beings. You and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
Those elements are interdependent and interconnected, right? And so we can't, take apart one from the other. They're very connected. So before we look at the barriers to emotional intimacy, let's understand what it even means. We love this quote by Christian author Jill Savage. She beautifully describes it. So she says emotional intimacy occurs where there is enough trust and communication between you and your spouse that it allows you both to share your innermost selves. Deep emotional intimacy is when we feel wholly accepted, respected, and admired in the eyes of our mate, even when they know our innermost struggles and failures. Emotional intimacy fosters compassion and support, providing a firm foundation for a marriage to last a lifetime. All right, so I love this quote so much. I love several parts of it. Let's first break down like this one sentence. She says, so deep emotional intimacy is when we feel wholly accepted, respected, and admired. Wow. That does speak so much to how God designed marriage. I really feel like, when you think about when you're first dating, we were talking about this story earlier.
Yeah.
So when Adrian and I were first dating, which was 15 years ago or more, we had those Nextel.
Walkie-talkie to beep phones.
Yeah.
Remember those?
Do you guys remember those phones?
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. We like burned those out. We desired to know each other so much on an emotional level that we would spend hours and hours and hours talking on those phones, like till late in the middle of the night, walking back and forth to one another.
Mhm.
That was such a special time, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a great time. And then the whole thing was is that we were connecting on a deeper, more emotional level, right?
Yeah.
We started having some conversations about life, about like things that we dreamed about and things that we wanted to accomplish. And we started having kind of way beyond surface level conversations where we were really starting to connect deeply. And I think that's where we really fell in love. I mean, connecting over direct connect because we were connecting with each other's hearts. Like the Focus on the Family quote talks about the mingling of souls. The mingling of souls was happening there because it was so much deeper, the level of connection, than it was just kind of like we were going purposely kind of deep in that
Yeah,
way.
and I think there's something so powerful when somebody really knows all of your stuff and
Yeah.
loves you anyway, and desires to continue to know more and more about you and wants to hear what you have to say. And just listen. It's so powerful, you guys. It's so healing. It's so transformative. It's really God's perfect design for marriage, if you think about it.
And I think that's what he ultimately desires for us.
Yeah.
He wants us to, on a human level, have a relationship where we are deeply known as a little glimpse or reflection about how
Mm,
deeply known and loved that we are by him. And
amen.
so that's a
Amen.
beautiful thing when that functions correctly within the context of marriage.
Amen. Yeah.
So here's another quote that we love. The marriage covenant allows us to fully put down our barriers and defenses and to be our true selves. We can stop the striving, doubting, and worrying. We don't have to fear our spouse truly knowing us and walking away because they have promised to be with us until death and vice versa. This is a quote by Alyssa Bethke in the Love That Lasts for Women workbook. Now, guys, all the resources that we mentioned today, we will make sure to have linked down in the description and also in the show notes. So that way, if you guys want to investigate those more further, you can be able to do that.
Yeah, check them out.
So check them out. Good stuff. Good stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk about those barriers. So, what are those things that are literally blocking us from growing in intimacy on an emotional level? Talking about that today. Now, we are going to go ahead and highlight three, but this is by no means exhaustive. And there are many other different barriers that potentially exist. But these are three of the common ones that we've experienced in our own experience and that we've run across in, counseling with couples and various other different things. So, let me go on and just say what they are, and then we'll break them down a little bit.
Yeah.
So, number one is mentally checking out. Basically, just emotionally checking your emotions at the door. You're physically present, but but that's about it. You ain't invested in the conversation. You just, for whatever reason, and there are legitimate reasons for that, and there are illegitimate reasons for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The second thing is really fear of rejection. And if you think about it, nobody wants to be rejected, right? How many of you want to raise your hand right now and say, I want to be rejected? Right? No person in their right mind wants to experience rejection because God wired us for connection, for relationship, right?
Yeah.
So out of this fear of rejection, what it really does is it limits authenticity and vulnerability in the context of the relationship. And if you can't be authentic and have transparency with your spouse, the closest relationship you're supposed to have on this earth, then how can we really have that in the context of human relationship, right? And so with this fear of rejection, it prevents us from being emotionally honest with each other. And that's ultimately what we want. And really the last one is just general precepts about bad communication. There are just a lot of general things. I mean, and we all are very guilty of this at a given time about communicating ineffectively. And so bad communication is another one that is a barrier to emotional intimacy.
So, you guys, I'm going to start with just breaking down what it means to mentally check out. I think we all do this like all the time. And sometimes it's unintentional and sometimes it's intentional. So, what does it look like to mentally check out? First of all, sometimes we're distracted. Maybe we're just over it in our marriage. Maybe we're just over the conversation, the day, all the things. Maybe we're just being plain old lazy in our marriage and we mentally check out. Maybe we are so disinterested and the relationship is so broken that we've just completely checked out. So all of these kind of things happen, right? So no matter what the reason, this is a huge barrier for emotional intimacy when we mentally check out. So let's talk about the unintentional ways. I know for me as your wife, I I have been guilty of just mentally checking out. Like you'll be talking to me and there's been times, and I'm sure all of you other wives have done this. So there's grace for us, but like there's times when Adrian will be talking to me and he's talked for like 20 minutes and I've literally not heard a word he said. That is just me being completely distracted, whether it's on my phone or distracted in my own world, whether it's my own thoughts or things I'm working on or thinking about. And I've completely not heard a word he said. Now that is really hurtful.
Sometimes it is, yeah.
Yeah, like it's hurtful. I mean, it's hurtful. Like I've seen you completely deflate when I realize like, hello, I've not even been listening, and I say to him, honey, I'm sorry, but I haven't even heard a word you say. I could see him visually deflate, like, oh,
and
really?
vice versa. I mean, it's happened with me as well.
Sure.
There are times when it's very easy for me when I am just tired and I don't want to waste mental energy, if I could say, to be able to easily fall into watching a YouTube video or doing something on my phone. I will be an arm's length away from Jen where I could physically touch her on the same couch and she's talking to me and I have my face in my phone. And when I have my face in my phone, I will hear audibly words coming from her mouth, but I will not have heard anything that she has said. And she'll sometimes say to me, because I'm distracted, she'll say, I need your eyes. And the whole idea of that is basically when we're actually looking at each other, It is a way of saying that I'm here, I'm invested right now. We're looking at each other, we're invested in this conversation. And so now that's like my cue, and that's something we've just kind of worked on, and it's just kind of
Yeah.
fallen into place. And you could take that in an offensive way, but to me it's not offensive at all. It means like, okay, now I need to actually listen to what's going on.
Yeah,
And
it's
so yeah.
true. It's
Mhm.
true. So, unintentionally, sometimes we're just distracted, sometimes we're tired, both of those ways.
Mhm.
But then there's also mentally checking out because we are doing it intentionally. Um, I'm sure we've done this as well.
Oh yeah.
We've definitely seen this in couples that we've counseled and met with and mentored. Just sometimes we mentally check out because we're just so done in the relationship and we're just checked out basically. Sometimes we mentally check out to punish the other person, and this is something that can be so harmful in your relationship, but you're literally like punishing them through silence or just checking out in the situation. either way
Mhm.
Either way, whether it's an unintentional or intentional mental checkout, we need to check our hearts, guys, okay? Because it really does matter, and it really is a barrier to our emotional intimacy. If we want to have a healthy and thriving marriage, we have to be engaged.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be 100% of the time. Obviously there's grace, but like we do have to make the investment and be engaged in our relationship, mentally checking in.
Mhm. Yeah, we have
Yeah.
to mentally check in.
Yeah, so good.
So the second thing we kind of want to talk about a little bit was this idea of the fear of rejection. All right.
Mm,
So this is rejection is such a powerful emotion. I
yeah.
mean, since we're so innately wired that way to have human contact, to be rejected by somebody that you love is so deeply hurtful. And it's hurtful on so many levels, especially on an emotional level.
Yeah.
So we're all prone to disappointment if you think about it, and feelings of rejection, especially in the aftermath of being hurt within the context of a relationship or in a broken relationship in and of itself. When I think about this, I think right back to the garden in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 to 20. It reads as follows. It says, "Then the Lord God said, 'It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him.' Now out of the ground the Lord God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock, and to the birds of the heavens, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him."
All right. So the only thing that God has said was not good was for man to be alone. Think about that, you guys. Think about that. He finishes his glorious creation. He has done all this work to build this amazing world.
Yeah.
And the only thing that he thought was not good was for man to be alone. Um, so Adam didn't have anyone that he could relate to. He was the only being of his type. And so God saw to it that woman was created.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So my point is that humans were made, you guys, to be relational beings. We are biologically wired for the longing to belong. We fear being seen in a critical way. We're anxious about the prospect of being cut off, isolated, or rejected. All of this is so important and so important to how we are wired as human beings. So, the fear of rejection is closely tied, understandably,
Yeah.
to insecurities, to guilt, to shame. All of that's really closely connected. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we think about it, if you think about the concept of rejection, right? If a person is in a marital relationship and they are worried about being rejected by their spouse for whatever reason, they might be unwilling to really share how they feel.
Mm.
I mean, and if you're unwilling to really share how you feel, you can be taken advantage of. You can be, not, your needs are not being met. You're voiceless in the marriage. I mean, there's so many different deep seated hurt things that can happen in light of that situation. A spouse should make their spouse feel safe, that they are safe to bring to them their emotions and what they're feeling at that time. Jen and I talk a lot when we talk about emotions to people. We say a lot of times that we have to own how we feel, right? And that I can never tell her how to feel. So whatever feeling that she is feeling is valid because that's how she is feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So
I
true.
can't say that it's invalid by what I perceive about the way that she feels. So a lot of times it takes a good knowledge of being us able to understand how we genuinely feel. And if a safe space is not created in order for a spouse to actually communicate to the other individual, this is how I feel in this given situation, then you run into some potential downfalls and pitfalls.
I mean, let's be honest, guys. We're different. We're totally wired differently. Like I'm a woman,
Hmm.
he's a man. I don't think the same way. And if he didn't understand that principle, it'd be really hard for me to share some of the things I am feeling or thinking at different times because it's
Hmm.
so foreign to the way he thinks. Many, many, many times I will say, "Oh man, I'm really struggling with this thing." And he's like, "I don't even understand that. Why would you struggle with that?" You know what I
Hmm.
mean? That may be his default and then he realizes that's not helpful. you know? But
After
like
lots of trial and error.
yeah, but I mean, like, that's an important thing to understand is that, we are wired differently and that's how God wired us and that's okay. But in order to be able to really be emotionally intimate with one another, we can't have a barrier where everything I say to you is garbage or is crazy and you react like I'm being crazy. Like that does
Hmm.
not help our emotional intimacy, right? You have to be able to process the fact that I think and feel differently than you. And that's okay. That's how I'm wired. And be able to check your own response to that. Otherwise, how would I feel comfortable sharing my thoughts and heart with you? You know what I mean?
True. Very true. I totally get that. I'm going to tell on myself right now as an example. Okay. So, you know, being the pastor of a church, and Jen happens to work with me. She works with me part time at the church. So, unlike certain relationships where husband and wife don't actually work together, we work together. So, there's plenty of different dynamics as it relates to the working relationship. Okay.
hmm
Now, Jen and I sometimes disagree about certain things when it comes to
No.
work. You don't disagree with your spouse about anything, do you? Right? So,
Ah!
especially as it relates to certain things with work, sometimes we have disagreements. Now, the problem is not the fact that she thinks differently than I do.
Mm,
She should have the liberty to be able to think differently than I do. And sometimes her viewpoint is a necessary viewpoint and it's something that I've come back to afterward and said she was right.
mm.
And I listened to her and actually followed her lead on a decision that we made, and it was the right decision. And so I have to recognize that she has wisdom and she has giftings and abilities, and she has all that as well.
Thanks, honey.
Well, you are so welcome. But the thing is that that's not the problem. The problem
Mm,
is if I create an atmosphere where immediately Jen feels that if she brings her feelings to me about a disagreement that she may have, or generally how she's feeling about a certain situation, and if she perceives that I'm immediately going to trample on her, or I'm just going to discredit her, or I'm just going to essentially shut her up, for lack of a better word, and just don't want to hear what she has to say,
mm.
then I'm not cultivating a safe space for her to be able to actually have her voice heard.
Mic
And her,
drop.
and
Like,
her,
seriously, that was so good. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, that's so important. Like, so, so, so important.
yeah, she needs to have her voice be able to be heard. And so, if not, I am communicating heaps and mounds of rejection, of which it may cause irreparable or very, very, lots of damage in our relationship that could take a long time to be able to heal. Because then her perception might be like this wounded animal in that way. It's like, okay, I've been hurt so much that I don't want to come to you with these feelings because you're just going to hurt me more. And so then there's no transparency, there's no authenticity. Nobody wants to walk around in a relationship on eggshells to feel like that they're always kind of being criticized or judged for what they say or what they feel. And so that's really, really important. And I have been so totally guilty of that sometimes as it relates to our work situation, but it has even bled over into other different things. And I have to take responsibility that if that sense of rejection is projected in her, it's not
Mhm.
because of her. It's because I've created an unsafe environment. It's
Mm.
my fault in that way. I've created this environment where she feels like she cannot come to me with the way that she feels because of the rejection. I have made a space unsafe when it should never be the case when it comes to marriage.
Well, and we both can do that. It's not that you have necessarily been the only one. And I also think it's important to say that just because your spouse, just like when I come to you with something, it doesn't mean that you're going to act on it either, right? Like
Hmm.
it's just about being heard at that point. It's just about being heard and being able to have a safe space where you can be heard. Not every like idea or thought or feeling can be acted upon, but you definitely want your spouse to make sure they feel heard, and that is so important.
Yeah,
So
there's so much value in that.
yeah, so good.
Yeah. So let me ask you all a question and throw out a question for you guys to consider related to this specific barrier. Does the climate of your relationship allow you and your spouse to communicate honestly about how you feel
Mm,
without any idea of potential rejection? Why or why not? Is that safe space been created?
mm.
Do you feel like you can come to your spouse with anything in that way? So what can you do about it? If that space has not been created, or what can you do about it to foster this kind of idea and go against this kind of fear of rejection? Is you can have what we like to call a courageous conversation.
Yeah.
Now, that is not original with us. Some marriage mentors actually gave us to that a number of years ago.
Mm,
But the idea of a courageous conversation is kind of like what it sounds. It's mustering up the courage to have a conversation that everybody knows needs to be had, but don't really want to have, but being willing to walk in boldness. And sometimes it takes the first step of somebody who's willing to go outside of their comfort zone to do that. So
mm.
maybe you need to have a courageous conversation with your spouse and say, I need to sit down with you and tell you how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
I'm feeling rejected right now. And the funny thing is maybe some of those things were unintentional. We may have unintentionally projected a sense of rejection. And sometimes those things are intentional as well. And if it's intentional, those are things that we need to correct.
Yeah.
And if they were unintentional, maybe there's some misunderstanding or whatever, you're cultivating intimacy and communication because you're hearing each other and you're understanding each other
Yeah.
from that. So have a courageous conversation today if you need to.
That's so good. And sometimes those are conversations that do need to be sought out with counseling.
Hmm.
Not everything and I'm sure that'll come up throughout this podcast for Marriage Ignited. We're huge advocates for counseling. And we can always send you a link to find some great Christian counselors in your area. That is a really great referral link. So, the next option. So, we've talked about barriers to emotional intimacy. We've talked about just checking out,
Just
mentally
check it out.
checking out.
Hmm.
We've talked about rejection. And now we're going to talk about bad communication. So, you guys, communication is something that we love to teach on.
Yes.
And we have a ton of content to teach on. So, we are not even scratching the surface today with this topic. But I want you guys to just think about it as it relates to a barrier to emotional intimacy. If we are not communicating well, that is kind of a game changer, right?
Yes.
Like
Mhm.
it totally makes a huge difference. So, obviously, we believe this, and I know that you guys know this because this is like so foundational. We believe that good communication is vital to a healthy and growing marriage.
We all know that, right? I mean, the reality is that that's one of those unknown, that's one of those known things, but it's one of the things that's still worth repeating over and over
Yeah.
again.
And sometimes I think we just need to check in on it,
Yeah.
just check
Mhm.
in and see how it's doing. So here's what bad communication looked like. Again, there's probably many more things that could be listed under this, but we're going to share a few. Okay. So bad communication looks like an inability to be assertive. Assertiveness gets a bad rap in
Mhm.
our world. Like, assertiveness is not aggression. Assertiveness is just being able to express your feelings and ask for what you want in a relationship. That is a definition that we love from Prepare-Enrich. And that is a definition that's so clear. We have to be able to express our feelings and ask for what we want or need in a relationship.
Doesn't that make so much sense though?
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. I mean, we make it complicated. If you cannot express how you feel to your spouse, you will not grow intimately, period. And really all three of these areas, but
Yeah.
especially emotionally, you're not going to be able to connect if
Yeah.
you can do that. You can't do that.
Yeah. So that's a huge one. Another example, I guess, of bad communication is expecting your spouse to be able to read your mind.
Ain't gonna work.
Yo, like listen, you guys, this is probably like I swear we've been doing marriage counseling for almost the whole time we've been married. So, but like, let's say really a lot for the last 10 years. And we've seen so many couples. And honestly, all of the problems that come in, I would say 90% of the problems that come in have boiled down to communication one way or another.
Yeah.
Even when there's been like infidelity and other things like that happening, it really, if you back up in the relationship, it really did was because of communication,
Sure.
right? So this comes up over and over and over again. Okay, you guys. So when it comes to bad communication, expecting our spouse to read our mind, that is not ever going to happen in the world.
Nope,
Like
nope,
your
nope.
spouse is never going to read your mind. It doesn't matter if you've been married, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, 50 years. Yes, can they kind of learn your rhythms in life? Yeah, that's possible. But like they're never going to be able to read your mind. And honestly, it's such a tool for bad communication because it really is forcing the other person to fail. Really, if you think about it. Like if I'm waiting
Mhm.
as your wife for you to read my mind and you're never going to get that. You're never going to do that. Like you don't have superpowers like Superman or whatever, then you're going to fail at whatever my need is. You're never going to meet my need because you don't know my need.
And then you're going to get caught up in this cycle where you're going to think, well, my spouse really doesn't care about me because
Mm,
they're not meeting my needs.
yeah.
And then that spouse doesn't even realize you haven't told me what's going on, but they get this sense, and then passive aggressiveness kind of like
Oh,
weeps in, and it's like trying to drop these clues. And how much more misery could just be shared if we could just simply say, this is what I need
yeah.
right now.
Yeah. You guys, it's not fun and games here, right? Like
No.
we have to be clear. We have to be responsible with what we need and be able to share it. So, expecting your spouse to read your mind doesn't work. All right. The other one is unwilling or not being actively listening. What do we mean by actively listening? Actively listening is pretty simple. It's hearing, not just hearing the words that your spouse is saying, but actually like fully engaging and responding with understanding to what they're saying. So when we say active listening, this is something that we love, a concept from Prepare-Enrich, and many other marriage tools teach this. And it's really all about really listening for understanding, not just to respond.
Yeah, we I have to say a funny story here because I happen to have I can remember things a lot of times.
Pause.
So
He's a genius, you guys. Like, no, he's literally a genius. Like,
no.
he's got like a really big brain and he just remembers all the things.
Well, Jen, we joke, but it's not really a joke. We can laugh about it now because now we've gained understanding. But there would be times when Jen and I would be sitting next to each other and she would communicate. And so she's saying words, and I am semi checked out, but I'm checked in enough to the conversation that I can actually hear the words that she's communicating. And so I will be listening to the words. And then Jen will all of a sudden tell me, she'll stop and she'll be like, are you even listening to me? And just for me to prove that I was somewhat hearing the words, I would recite to her basically everything that she said. She picked up on this very quickly, though. It wasn't the fact that I was actually really listening. See, that's not active listening.
Right.
I wasn't listening to understand her heart and what she was communicating. I was listening just to either get out of the conversation or to moving on or whatever the case may be. I was somewhat engaged and I heard words, but I didn't hear her heart. That's important. Active listening isn't just hearing words, it's hearing the person's heart. So that way you get understanding, you gain understanding in it.
So good. So when it comes to a barrier to intimacy, to emotional intimacy, bad communication is huge. So what does good communication look like? This is again just it's a little highlight of what we're going to go into more in future podcasts, okay? So good communication, we love this definition from Prepare-Enrich. It's honest, it's immediate, it's clear, it's supportive, paper switch, and it's to the point. So you guys, honest, let's just talk about what that looks like. Saying what you mean and meaning what you say. That's it. Pretty simple. It's immediate, communicating quickly. This is so important because it helps you from bottling up those feelings and having like an issue later on. Whether that's an emotional issue or even a physical issue when you bottle up those feelings.
Yeah.
Being clear. This means no hinting, one thing at a time, and knowing the difference between facts and opinions. Okay. Being supportive. If you're really trying to communicate with your spouse and you're attacking the person and not the problem together, that's never going to be effective. Okay. So be supportive. Try to choose statements that are helpful and not hurtful.
We say life-giving, right? Things that will build up, not tear down.
Exactly. And then to the point, okay, stay on topic. It's so easy to like just ramble on or get on other topics, when you're working through something or when you're sharing about something with your spouse. So stay on topics so you don't forget what you're talking about and so your spouse doesn't forget what you're talking about.
Yeah. So we're just scratching the surface with communication, but we want to say another basic principle. Communication at its essence and its core is really twofold. It's the sending of a message and it's the receiving of a message. I know I just blew your mind right then and there. But here's the reality about this. So, how do you actually send a message? Most of the time, when we think about communication, we think about what we're doing right now. I'm talking to you, right? We think about verbal communication, actually using words. However, studies have really shown that about 93% of our actual communication has zero to do with what is actually coming out of our mouth. Majority of it has to do with our tone and it has to do with our body language. But if you think about that, that makes so much sense. If you're
Yeah.
standing face to face with another person and if they say, I love you, but they have their arms crossed and they have a mad dog look on their face, you ain't really going to believe the words that are coming out of their mouth, right?
Yeah.
So your body language and your tone says a whole lot about what you're actually trying to say. And
Mhm.
so that is very, very important when it comes to communication. The I the ideal form of communication is still to this day, even me being a millennial, is still face-to-face contact. All right. And the reason why is that, especially when it comes into conflict, when we get to conflict, this is huge. A lot of times we communicate by various quick means, right? We do a text, we send an email. Those are just quick, various different means, and we can communicate certain things through those mediums. The problem is that when you read words on a screen, you cannot see the person's face, you can't see their body language, you can't see their tone. So it leaves a whole lot of room for interpretation about what is actually being communicated in the message that you are receiving. And so, ideally, especially when it comes to your spouse, and we'll get a lot into this when we talk about conflict, you want to communicate as much as you can. When you need to communicate things that are very important, you need to communicate those things face to face.
Face to face is the only way, you guys. He's so right.
Mhm,
The message gets lost. Think about how
mhm.
this works, even with your coworkers, the other people in your family, friends. When you send a text and you get a text back, and you're like, "What in the world?" Like they totally didn't get what I was
Mhm.
saying. It's so true. Yeah, that's the only way. It's the best way.
It is.
Face to face.
Mhm.
All right, you guys. So we have covered some barriers to emotional intimacy. We hope this was a blessing to you. Those barriers were, again, mentally checking out, fear of rejection, and bad communication. So, what we want you guys to do, the tool for this episode,
Yep.
is going to be, we want you to review some of the questions that we asked. We're going to have them listed out in the show notes and the description, video description. And we want you to spend some time like thinking about them, journaling them, writing
Mhm.
them down, writing your answers down to some of these questions. They're really questions rooted in each one of those areas of barriers that kind of really are reflective of where are you at with those? How are you contributing to some of those?
Yeah, and the whole point is to foster discussion.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And then we want you to take your answers, if possible, in your relationship, because not all relationships it may not be possible, but if possible in your relationship, sit down with your spouse and talk through those questions together and talk through your answers. Kind of evaluate, where are you guys on your emotional intimacy and how can you grow? What barriers are you contributing as a spouse to the barriers in your relationship for as far as emotional intimacy?
Yeah, and we think that it'll be very helpful. And how much can you grow emotionally by taking that time and actually spending that time together and communicating and creating safe space to be able to do so?
Yes, so good.
So, next week and next week's episode, we are going to talk about the second of these kind of barriers to intimacy. And we're going to talk about it from the concept of spiritual intimacy next week. We're really excited to be able to share that with you. And we are so excited about sharing a tool that Jen created that we have utilized in our marriage. And it's been such an amazing, amazing blessing to our marriage that we have used time and time again now. So we can't wait to be able to give that to you. So we are going to drop new content, new episode every Tuesday. That's the goal. And we want to bring you both the kind of practical and spiritual, so that way you can utilize this podcast to invest into your marriage. So if you're watching this video and you like this content, please subscribe to this channel. It'll give great exposure to Marriage Ignited. Like this video, but also share this with a friend. Share this with a couple that you know that may benefit from this type of content. Word of mouth is the best way that this is going to be able to spread, and we'd love to see it invest in many, many more marriages.
Yeah, and you guys, we're covering a bunch of different topics. I shared the last time. We're going to be covering so many things related to communication, conflict. We're going to be sharing our story with infertility. But if you have a topic that you would love for us to address on the podcast, please drop that in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Just your thoughts, things that stood out to you during today's podcast, but also any ideas that you had that you would like us to address in future podcasts. We're also so excited to be with you guys next Tuesday and continuing this conversation on barriers to intimacy. It is going to be such a great episode.
We can't wait, guys.
All right, you guys.
We'll see you then.
Have a great week.